Good evening and welcome to the 202nd ranked soccer podcast in the United States on Apple Podcasts. We're the soccer show for people who think Morecambe is the name of a porno.
That was a good one, Phil.
A little bit over the edge for our average show opening, but when it comes to a rival of Accrington Stanley, anything's fair game, I say.
They're going to love that in that town, I'm sure. Hey, and well done on pronouncing the name as well. You're no amateur anymore, are you? You're a seasoned hand at this.
Yeah, he's getting better for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, after 2 years of podcasts, I've certainly named more English cities than I've ever thought that I would. But it's a lot of fun, and guys. Well, first I forgot to say that my name is Phil Kennedy, and I'm joined tonight by Arran Ayers and Matt Robards.
How's it going
on, guys?
Yeah,
it's going well, man. It's been a while.
It has been a while. Good to have the crew back together again. That's entirely my fault, of course.
It's hard to believe that in 125 episodes plus special editions now that we've never done anything like this before.
Yes, because on tonight's show, it's listener questions. Our listeners, we have listeners now, are going to put Phil, Matt, and myself to the sword with some really, really great questions and some really, really probably not so insightful answers. I'm really looking forward to this one tonight, lads. But first,
follow us on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. You just search Across the Pitch. Usually you find us on there talking about matches, but, there's not too many matches going on right now. So we're generally just posting funny things, interesting stories that come our way, all in preparation for the day that football returns, which, if you're a Bundesliga fan, happens to be this coming Saturday, May 16th. So that's exciting. Hopefully, we return to some sort of soccer in England as well as over here in the States. We all are very excited to see Phoenix Rising back in action as they started limited practice this past weekend, guys.
They did. I even got a mention or a showing on local media as a Phoenix Rising fan.
It was good to see them back. They're, limited groups. They're taking a lot of good precautions, temperatures, as they come into the place. They're wearing face masks as they, come to the training facility. So it's good to see them back out there. Good to see them taking some precautions. And really what it means is we are now one step closer to live football.
Yeah, it felt like preseason. I think you said that, Matt, in one of our chats during the week that, it's preseason. It looks like we're warming up again. We're getting ready to start the season again. And it's great.
Yeah, very much have that feel, especially, those shots of them on Monday coming back to the training ground and, the kind of the slow walk-ups with the pump-up music laid over top. Very much that feel of preseason is back in action. So good to see that happening.
Absolutely. Hey, who's our Bundesliga team? Are we supporting a team here, anyone?
Yes. Well, first I was going to say good evening and welcome to Über das Feld.
Ooh, hey.
Look at that.
That was almost romantic, Phil.
You've upgraded your English pronouncement of towns, and now you're speaking some German. I mean, Phil, you're just growing leaps and bounds this quarantine.
You've really put that quarantine to good use, haven't you?
Well, we'll answer. Actually, we have a question specifically about that. But in regards to Bundesliga, the team that at least Matt and myself have chosen is actually going to be playing in the very first match that's at 6:30 a.m. Arizona time this Saturday, May 16th. I put out a poll on Twitter about who is going to be waking up at that time to watch the match. And in a very close poll, we got 30 votes in. 53.3% said they will be watching this match. So that's given that our audience is generally English and American football fans, that's a pretty good number, I would say.
Yeah, that's awesome. It's good to, I'm excited. 6:30. I'm usually up anyways because a couple of my kids don't know what sleeping in means. So it'll be good to throw on some live soccer. And like you said, man, I've kind of adopted Schalke. I don't know if it's necessarily, support the right word, but it's nice to have some rooting interest, at least in the only league that's going to be going.
Right. That makes sense. I'm with you on that. Well, no, I'm not actually.
It's not the only league that's going, because of course we've been doing weekly episodes on the only league that has been going all along, which is the Belarus League. They're also playing in Tajikistan, I believe, but there's really not any way to watch that because I guess unless you have a Tajikistan satellite network or something like that. But yeah,
they're also playing in South Korea now too. I think Copa 90 is streaming those live on YouTube every once in a while.
Oh, okay, interesting.
Yeah, don't they have the baseball games are on ESPN now too?
Yeah, probably ESPN doesn't have much to go on these days, do they?
Well, I'll tell you, I'm between the Michael Jordan documentary, The Last Dance, and UFC. I've probably watched more ESPN in the last couple of weeks than just about ever.
When are you starting up across the? What is that ring?
Across the octagon.
Octagon. There you go. That's it.
Hey, I might have to. I mean, it's the only thing going right now. I honestly, I hadn't watched UFC since about 2012 until Saturday. I decided, there hasn't been any live sports, so I went ahead and They had this deal. So, I mean, obviously, you get ESPN Plus anyway for the soccer content. So they had this deal where it was like a year of ESPN Plus the fight for $85. So I was like, well, it's really like getting the fight for $25, so why not? And, so I guess, like Forrest Gump said, just like that, I started watching UFC again.
I did see that the other day. Phil, did you have a Bundesliga team you're supporting? Because that was a massive digression here. I'm going to have to get us back on track.
Oh, well, I'm going to do Schalke as well. There's a few things I like about him. Weston McKennie is probably, to me, he's a guy that I've enjoyed watching the U.S. national team. I remember he had a big goal in the Champions League about 2 seasons ago. And then, like I said, I mean, they're kind of like that team that it seems to finish 4th every year. So I was like, it'll just be just like watching Arsenal.
I don't know whether to laugh or cry over that. Well, I've decided because we can't all be supporting the same team that I've decided to go for Borussia Mönchengladbach. And I've chosen it because of 2 reasons. 1, that horrendous name, and 2, their horrendous logo. I don't know if you've seen this at all, but it's like this uppercase B inside a diamond with black and white stripes, and everything about it just sends your eyes ablaze. Like, seriously, I feel like I'm having a seizure looking at it. Do you know what I mean? It's pretty ordinary.
Realistically, none of the German crests are really that great, in my opinion. I mean, I'm probably going to get a lot of hate mail for that one.
Good. We love hate mail.
But yeah, I forgot to mention one of the other reasons that I decided to support Schalke is I found that they're located in a place called Gelsenkirchen, and I wanted to be able to pronounce that on the show on a frequent basis.
Nicely done, man. Nicely done.
Thank you. The other thing is this is a huge digression, but I had this thought the other night as I was thinking that actually all American food is actually German food. And if you think about it, a hamburger is called a hamburger because it originated in Hamburg, Germany.
Dude,
and
pizza.
a hot dog is
Pizza. Yeah, I'm just shooting you down here, mate. Pizza.
well, pizza's not American, it's Italian.
Well, that's your argument, though. I mean, people equate, pizza.
No, but hot dogs and hamburgers are the classic American food. And basically, so a hamburger is a hamburger because Hamburg, and then a hot dog can also be called a Frankfurter because it came from Frankfurt. So I mean, all of the classic American foods are actually German.
Here's a bit of trivia for you guys. Where was the apple pie originated from? Where did the apple pie originate from?
It was actually, wasn't it like Scandinavia?
It was not Scandinavia.
Okay.
Aaron, you got to guess?
I have to guess.
Yeah.
Or do I? Okay. I don't know. Let's just say something really probably offensive to most Americans because Americans let's go with England.
Oh, dude, you nailed it. It is England.
That's hilarious, man.
I had read that before. I had read that before, and so from what I had read is that it basically it started anywhere between like England, Holland, and Scandinavia, and there's like some argument over that, but it specifically did not start in America because edible apples aren't even native to this continent.
Oh, snap.
There you go. This is where quarantine has brought us, talking about the origins of hot dogs, hamburgers, and apple pie. Stay tuned as we actually discuss in detail how hot dogs are made. Aaron, you want to lead us off with that one?
No.
Yeah, I think that's where the digression needs to turn back to what I had hoped to lead off our listener question show with was actually something that didn't come to me as a listener question, but it came to me as a question from a university study. It was a simple question that was presented to me, and it was by Ben Wild, who is the Accrington Stanley I Follow commentator. If you haven't listened to the recent episode, he came on and did the Newcastle bad signings with us. That's what he definitely did when he missed out on.
That was a good one.
But he's doing some university work, and for a study for his university, he presented the question to me for general fans' thoughts on the EFL as an organization. And of course, especially with everything that's going on in the news right now with, Accrington Stanley and, of course, Chairman Andy Holt's stance on completing the season. You have some other clubs like Peterborough, Oxford, Ipswich, kind of the big fish in the sea are kind of trying to force League One to complete the season. The smaller clubs are kind of saying, well, we can't pay the bills without butts in the seats. So basically, with all of this going on right now, the question was presented to me, and I put a lot of thought into it, and I really wanted to read this answer on the air because basically here's what I came up with is that realistically, it's very easy to be critical of the EFL, and it's certainly not without merit. However, the EFL's job, it's not easy because at the end of the day, they're at the liberty of the Premier League's money trickling down to them due to the fact that all of the clubs are independent entities. It's a pro-rel system. It's not a closed system like here in the United States. Therefore, by the nature of things, the EFL is in the unenviable position of managing what is an ultimately dog-eat-dog world among clubs. The system is broken and needs to be fixed. But the problem, it's economics. When you have a scope of teams as diverse economically as Accrington and Sunderland all playing in the same division, it's not just an EFL problem. It's a problem with the economics in general. And it's the same problem when looking at something like the problems of a country with the economy the size of Germany and a country the economy the size of Greece, both operating off the euro. In these economic models, the little guy is always going to be at a disadvantage. The irony with looking at this from across the pond is that English and European soccer, and this as a whole, in the United States, capitalism is looked at by the masses as a point of national pride. Yet, our major sports leagues, with the exception of baseball, operate off of a hybrid socialist system. However, when you look at English and European soccer, you see a model of extreme capitalism that would be more aligned with the political leanings on this side of the pond. Ultimately, what I see in European football is an experiment in the most absolute and unchecked of capitalism. And ultimately, EFL is just a cog, a small cog in that large and broken machine. What are your thoughts on that, guys?
Hey, Phil, real quick, man, for just our listeners that may not be too familiar with, the American sports system over here, or someone like myself who does not watch or follow baseball at all. How is baseball different from the rest of our major sports leagues?
I'd like to know that too, actually, Phil. That was a really good question, Matt.
Well, that's a very, very excellent question. And how it differs is that, for instance, in the NFL, here's how it works. And this is how it's guaranteed that every team makes money, every team stays competitive, and everything, you don't have teams going out of business, is a TV contract is given to the league. Then a percentage of that TV money is evenly divided among the teams. And then there's a salary cap where basically the teams are allowed to spend only up to that TV money that they're guaranteed on players. So every team has the same amount of money to spend on players, and that money is derived from the guaranteed TV money. And then they're free to make their profits off merchandise and whatever. But basically, a team is never going to go belly up in the NFL, which is American football, on players' salary, because that's paid with TV money guaranteed, divided evenly among teams. Baseball is the only team that doesn't do it. It's a complete free market system, just like soccer.
So the NFL, NHL, NBA, MLS all operate on a
revenue sharing and salary
sharing system and a salary cap.
Right.
I didn't know baseball didn't have a salary cap. That actually really surprises me. I don't follow baseball at all, but I just kind of assumed they did. So I'm really actually surprised by that.
Well, that's why you have teams like the Yankees, the Red Sox, the Dodgers, the Cubs that pay money for all the players. And that's why teams like the Diamondbacks, basically you have selling clubs. So the Diamondbacks are like a Leicester City. They can make a one-time run at, getting a championship, and then they're ultimately going to have to sell off those players. But the Diamondbacks won their championship back in 2001. They were only really able to do it because a bunch of players had agreed to defer salaries that are over like a 10-year period. They were still paying guys 10 years later just on the gamble of winning that one World Series, which brought him an extra $13 million in gate receipts.
So let me ask a question, kind of moving on into your statement here. You made the statement that ultimately European football as a whole is a seeming experiment in the absolute unchecked capitalism. How does, that kind of fit in with, financial fair play, that we hear about all the time, but if we're honest, do we really fully understand financial fair play? And,
No.
We often see clubs, get in trouble for breaking financial fair play. So it seems to me like European football is trying to operate on some sort of, for lack of a better term, a salary cap that seems to be sliding based on how much money you bring in, but it's not working.
No, it's not. And you're right, Matt. It is to do with the profitability of clubs rather than actually capping what you can pay for players. You have to turn a profit, basically, is what that financial fair play is saying. Sometime in the last 4 years as well, I believe it goes back, like it's that loose. But in terms of the salary cap, now it's a little way off. But I understand where it's coming from. It is basically saying those big investors that come in and buy the likes of your Manchester Cities and Chelsea and Newcastle United looks like maybe getting a new buyer shortly. The whole idea is basically to sort of smooth that transition out a little bit. Yes, you can inject money in there in the short term, but you've got to turn a profit.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think that's like Aaron, you hit it on the head, is that it's based on the profitability of the team versus shared revenue. I mean, the other problem is I think that, not to get political here, but you have the same problem with Manchester City is the problem that you have with a company like Apple, for instance. So in the United States, you have tax laws, but then you'll have Apple that'll take and stash their money offshore so they don't have to pay taxes on it. Same thing with Manchester City. You have, they're only supposed to take X amount of money from their sponsor, but then their sponsor is owned by their owner or like affiliated with their owner. So is this his money or is that the company's money? And it's just this big gray area. And it's just, it's not, I'm not saying that any way is right or wrong. I'm not trying to sit here and say the NFL system's better, even though it is. What I'm saying is that it's the most capitalistic system in the world. There's very few rules. And even the rules that are there, it's like this. We had one guy during the bad signings episode was basically making a point that some players that Manchester City signed, or I mean not Manchester City, but Manchester United signed, played poorly, were still a good signing because they made a profit because they sold a lot of shirts of that guy because they used to be famous with some other team, and then right, exactly. And that's what I'm saying is that I mean, no other team. I mean, Accrington Stanley goes out and freaking signs Thierry Henry and sells shirts or something like that. And, he's 50 years old and can't even get on the field. But okay, he signed for the team and he's selling shirts. I mean, how sporting of a thing would that be? But, I mean, not that would ever happen, but you know what I'm getting at.
Yeah. I get what you're saying. Phil, I want to address your initial question, okay, which is about, is the EFL a good organization? I guess that was the topic, wasn't it? Was it? That was a long time ago now.
Well, basically the question was just general thoughts on the EFL as an organization.
Okay, all right. So the EFL is between a rock and a hard place. The rock being non-division, absolute infamy, and the hard place being the Premier League. And yeah, it is a little bit of trickle-down economics there to the EFL. But I think we need to remember about how the Premier League came about and what a shambles the EFL was before the Premier League era. And when you think about 1980s football in England, which was governed by the EFL right up to the first division, they were locked out of Europe. They'd have regular issues with crowd control. The stadiums were crumbling. It was all a bit of a mess with the EFL in control. And In the early 90s, there was a bit of an awakening because Serie A was very popular, and you had like English players going over there to the Bundesliga and off to the Liga. All of a sudden, there was an awakening as to say, we need to do something about the structure of this. And it was a breakaway organisation. Premier League was a breakaway organisation. They said, no, we're done with you, EFL. We're going to go and sign our own TV rights. We're going to go and make our own profitability. And as a bone, there's your payments from the TV down the line. And that was it. And basically, the Premier League pulled the EFL, kicking and screaming into the 90s and into something that would eventually resemble some sort of a profitable pyramid. Do you know what I mean? That's a long time. A lot of water under the bridge now. Do you know what I mean? Like that's coming up 30 years.
So I think what you said is basically the EFL made their bed and now they're sleeping in it.
In short.
To sum up, yes.
Yeah, I mean, I think they have modernized. They're doing well right now with this whole COVID thing. It's not tricky for any organization out there, regardless of whether you're a sporting organization or you're selling cakes down the road. It's tough. EFL is in a remarkably tough situation because a lot of those clubs are already borderline broke anyway, you know. Damn. Yeah. Are they a good organization now? Good, not great. There we go.
Well, and I think they had to become, right? I mean, so if you're talking about how the Premier League came about and the kind of disarray the EFL was in, and all of a sudden there's this new top league called the Premier League. It's getting all these TV rights. They kind of have to come. And so really they're just kind of behind the eight ball, where you have the teams in the Premier League are the teams that, went out and branded themselves globally, so the Manchester Uniteds, the Liverpools, the Arsenals, the Chelseas, the Tottenhams, whatever. There's even the Wolves now, right? There's supporters club really in the Valley for every major Premier League club right now. Everton's got a local Valley supporters club, and Wolves, and all the big six clubs. And so now the EFL was kind of behind the times, and now you're starting to be able to watch the EFL Championship and League One in the States. And so it'll take a couple years for these new people coming to the sport that say, you know what, I don't want to go out and support United or Liverpool because then I might look like I'm just a glory hunter. And they do some research and they go, oh, here's this team in the championship called Derby County, and like, I'm going to support them. Like, I'm going to adopt them as my team. And so it's on these championship clubs, the EFL clubs, they need to start building that international brand. I mean, you guys, we're seeing it right now with Accrington, right? Now, all of a sudden there's people in the States, out that have no connection to Accrington outside of the football club.
Well, Matt,
that's kind of the great thing.
Matt, I'm glad you said that because first, that brings me to two questions. First, I want to wrap up this conversation with one thing that I think is kind of the most important topic here at the end of the day. And then also that will move us on perfectly to our first listener question, which will be from Peter Leatham, who is the chairman of the Accrington Stanley Supporters Trust.
I see the segue there. Nice one, mate.
But the thing I want to wrap up, and this to me is the bottom line discussion, at least as far as we're concerned, because this is something that we're really seeing playing out both on Twitter daily. If you're following these two chairmen on Twitter, you've actually seen this play out on Twitter, in addition to whatever's being happened in the media. So you have two different schools of thoughts here. First, you have Andy Holt, who's the chairman of the Accrington Stanley, who says, look, I do everything right. I run my club within its budget. We are, over or under, £100,000. We either make £100,000 or we lose £100,000 every year. We run completely sustainable based on we get 33% of our profit from gate receipts, 33% from the TV money, and 33% from everything else. If we don't get those butts in the seats, that's 33% So we go from breaking even to losing 33%. That's just not sustainable. We've built our model the way that you said, and now you're going to go and force us to try and play games behind closed doors.
Oh.
Or you have Derek McAnthony is the owner of Peterborough United, who said, look, Peterborough United is not Manchester United. I've gone out, I've put a bunch of money into my team. I've built a competitive team. Right now, we're 4 points out of a promotion spot with 9 games left to play. And you're supposed to say we were just not going to play those 9 games, close up shop. The money I spent on being competitive this season to get promoted to the championship doesn't matter. And the EFL has to decide which one of these guys is right.
Well, that's, I mean, here's the thing though. That's just in this situation, no one's gonna, you can't make everyone happy.
No.
So you look at Germany, and Germany said, hey, we're going to do Division 1, Division 2. So Bundesliga 2. We're going to finish out those seasons. Everything else is null and void. It's canceled for the season. I mean, it's a rough situation. Personally, if it was me, I would say you try to finish out the Premier League, you try to finish out the championship, and you just kind of have to cancel, League One on down. And yeah, does it suck for Peterborough? It does, man. It really does. It's just a rough situation, but you can't make everyone happy because, like you pointed out, Phil. Okay, so you make Peterborough happy, but now what about Accrington Stanley? What about them that say, dude, 33% of our income is now gone. How are we going to survive? And I think, he was right. Andy Holt was right. Is depending on how the EFL handles this, is you could see a lot of clubs next year in dire straits and needing some money. So unless the FA wants to come along and say, hey, you know what, Accrington, you guys are going to lose 33% of your budget. Here's that 33%. I mean, maybe that's what it takes, is the FA just saying, hey, we'll foot the bill.
The FA? Mm.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is exactly why Mesut Ozil decided to reduce his salary cut, is because he's going to give his money to Accrington Stanley so that I would stop talking crap about him on the show.
You lost that argument, Phil.
It's over. Let's move on to this first question.
Let's move on to our next listener question, or our first listener question. And kicking back to the Accrington Stanley interviews that I've been doing with Tony Robinson, Peter Leatham usually writes in a couple questions, and we call that Peter's Corner. And we're having a Peter's Corner question here, that what we're starting off with is his questions. And so this is our U.S. edition of Peter's Corner. And since I already kind of answered these questions in a 4,000-word blog, we are going to have these directed at you two guys. And so we've got Peter's Corner. And so Matt and Arran, like I said, I've already written a 4,000-word blog about this. So and all three of these questions are kind of in the same vein. So I'm just going to ask them to you here all at once and have both of you answer these. First of all, and I already know the answers to these, but so how did you two arrive at the UK teams that you support? Do you each support more than one team, for example, one large team and one small team? Have you already, or do you plan to in the future, visit England to watch either your small or large teams play?
Oh, this makes my heart so warm, I have to say. It really does.
You want to go sure. First, Arran?
Yeah, sure. You know what? I do have two teams, Peter. Arsenal is obviously my number one team. I was inducted into Arsenal life when I was working in the East End, EC1 in London. And it just was around me entirely, the entire time. And I didn't realize I was actually supporting Arsenal. I sort of I don't know. It was a bit of like an osmosis happening there. I just sort of found myself pining for the game after the first season ended, and I couldn't believe that I actually was in love with the team. There we go. So that was that one. And yes, I do have a smaller club that I love, and it's no secret on here. Obviously, it is Accrington Stanley. It started out as a joke between Phil and myself, and lo and behold, I think we've interviewed pretty much every like rostered player right now, haven't we, Phil? Plus the gaffer, plus the owner. And I tell you what, it's been amazing. I've met so many. Well, I wouldn't say I've met Accrington friends, but I've gathered friends from Accrington. So to answer your question, yes, the idea was to go over in August and go and catch an Accrington game and hopefully a cricket game while I was there. I don't know whether that's going to happen with the current situation, but I would love nothing more than that.
And I think one thing that I want to kind of clarify for everybody is this is something I've explained kind of before, and we've kind of explained a little bit before, but just for the purpose of I know we have a lot of new listeners, is so basically I came up with the idea of Across the Pitch in September of 2018.
Yep.
And it took me until November of 2018 to convince you that I was actually serious about it. And one of the things that I said is we're going to start a podcast and we're going to mostly talk about Phoenix Rising and Accrington Stanley.
Mm-hmm.
And you thought I was joking. And like I kept going and telling you about it, and you thought that I was joking, and that I was not serious about making a show about Phoenix Rising and Accrington Stanley. And then one day we finally made the show. And then the next day, I call you up and I'm like, okay, we're going to interview Scott Brown tomorrow. And you're like,
yeah.
Oh, wait.
I was like, you what? We've only done one episode, man. What the hell? It blew my mind. And all of a sudden, I was sold like that. You know what? We recorded the first episode. It wasn't too bad. I went back and listened to it. It wasn't too bad for a first go round. But yeah, second day after they came out, you're like, Scott Brown's coming on. I'm like, shut up. Brilliant. Absolutely brilliant.
And you know, it's funny. It's so I honestly believe that even though Arsenal honestly was both of our first love, it was just that was part of our destiny to become Accrington Stanley supporters. And I truly, and we'll get back to this because I want to mention how I believe it's been my destiny to be an Accrington Stanley supporter, because so in 1981 I was born, which was when the same year Accrington Stanley got their first modern promotion. In 1999 is when I graduated high school, which was when John Coleman arrived at Accrington Stanley. In 2006 is when I started regularly watching football as Accrington Stanley got promoted to the Football League. And in the summer of 2018 is when I decided to start the show, is when Accrington Stanley got promoted to League One.
Damned lies and statistics. How about that?
And you have a story about how you were recommended the first team that anyone ever recommended. And I want you to tell the whole story, even starting with the comic strip, because this is good stuff.
Oh, man. Okay. I'm not fully prepared for this, but okay. So I guess it was the summer of 2002. I first moved to England. I started working a pub over there, as Aussies are wont to do. You know, English guys will get that joke. Don't worry, that's fine. So I was working in a pub, and in the Sun newspaper, there was on like the inside back cover, not the inside front cover, not page 3, but an inside back cover, there was a little comic strip called Striker, I believe was the name of it. This is so embarrassing.
Hey, I'll tell the story, but before if you want an embarrassing story, when I first started watching Arsenal, I didn't understand what the Champions League was. And one time I saw a game that was like Arsenal and Barcelona, and I was like, oh, this must just be a friendly, and turned it off. And then like a week later, I found out what the Champions League was. So
that's brilliant. Yeah, so anyway, I quite like this. And if you can imagine, it was a bit like, I don't know, like a newspaper novella, like a soap opera, but it was based around this one particular guy called Striker, and he played for these also Arran teams. So it's still running. It's still running. And I'm trying to look it up as we're talking because I was completely unprepared for the question.
I just thought of it. I mean, I just wasn't planned. This wasn't planned, but this is good stuff. This really goes back to the formative days of the show. Like, right. These are the discussions that those 2 months from September to November, these were the things we were talking about.
Right, exactly. So, anyway, just to make a long story short, one of the regulars in the pub, he asked me, he's like, so you're supporting a football team, yeah? And I was like, yeah, I am actually. I'm supporting whatever the name of the team was at that particular time in this comic strip at the back of the newspaper, right? Because I thought this is just a recap, like I don't know, an animated, no, not even animated, but like a comic strip version of what happened on the weekend. You know what I mean?
For our NBA or for our American listeners, it would be like if somebody came over and was, you said, what's your favorite basketball team in the NBA? And they said the Washington Generals.
There you go. Exactly the type of thing. And I said the name of the club to this guy. I forget his name, but he was like, who do you support? And I was like, bam, the name of this club. And he kind of looked at me cockeyed, like, I've never heard of that. And he must have thought, and you know what? For one moment, he must have thought, man, this guy knows football. And then probably about a day or two later, he comes bawling into the pub. And he's like, you're talking about that comic strip in the back of the Sun. I'm like, yeah. And he's like, that's not real, you know. I'm like, oh, it isn't. Anyway, so that's that. That was one of my most Warbury. Warbury was the name of the club. It just came to me. That's embarrassing.
But so wasn't there was another part to that story, which is where I was going.
Oh, right, yeah. So it was actually a different guy who happened over here at both conversations in the pub. And he was like, well, you could support Dagenham and Redbridge because they need 2 teams to play against another team. And that reference went over my head. Dagenham and Redbridge are no longer, unfortunately. And then he's like,
they're in the conference.
Dagenham and Redbridge? No.
Or there's at least Dagenham is in the conference because I remember they were playing Barrow AFC earlier this year.
Oh, okay. All right. I could be wrong with that. Very good. But the other one, of course, was
they're east of West Ham.
That's correct. They are east of West Ham. The other one, of course, was Accrington Stanley, and the guy in the pub at the time, I forget his name. He was like an Ipswich fan, so you know, he didn't really have much to say apart from this one anecdote, which was like, oh yeah, Accrington Stanley, who are they? Everyone knows the milk commercial now. I'm not going to go through it. And I was like, all right. Fast forward about, I don't know, what are we talking, 20 odd years later, and I'm telling you the same story And no, we really need to go into this Accrington Stanley. I think this would be great. I'm like, no.
And now here we are, founders of the U.S. and Canadian fan club. I mean,
I'm so happy to be wrong about that, mate. You have no.
and this I've said this quote before, and I actually ended my article with it, but it hits home more and more. Is Accrington Stanley is the only sports team I've ever supported that makes me feel like they care about having me as a supporter as much as I care about supporting them. And that's not saying anything against any of the other teams, because when I support a team, that's a lot.
You do. This is true. For those of you out there who haven't met Phil personally, he supports teams, man. He supports teams, even rubbish teams like the Cowboys. Matt, you need to answer a question, I think.
Yeah, let's hear about your teams, because you've visited, haven't you?
Yeah. So, kind of just to go through these, I support Chelsea in London, and that all kind of came about through really the 2006 World Cup. So the 2006 World Cup was not a great showing for the U.S. by any stretch of the imagination. And so once they were kind of, clearly done and dusted, I just was watching just their other games and watched a lot of the English games, watched a lot of England. And at the time I was playing college soccer, and most of the time I'd play either in the midfield or, just kind of right back wherever the team needed me. And I really loved playing kind of like the box to box midfield role. And so I was watching England, and Frank Lampard just caught my attention. And so once that ended, the tournament was over. You do a little research, because, not many people might realize this in England, but really prior to 2004, 2005, you really didn't have the TV deals that we see now. And so right. If you were going to see a game on television, it was usually the big derby games, and it was usually either Manchester United or Liverpool. And that was about it. And so, I did a little research, found out Frank Lampard played for this little club in London called Chelsea FC, who had just happened to won the league that year. And so I just, began following them, came to find out that not only Frank Lampard was on that team, but also John Terry and Ashley Cole and Joe Cole. And so that's kind of where it all started in 2006, and I have been going strong ever since. And then really besides that, the only other team I support is Phoenix Rising here in the States.
Oh, of course.
So, those are kind of my two teams. I've said it before on some other podcasts. Those are the only two crests that'll ever be on my chest. Is Chelsea and Phoenix Rising. I've been to Stamford Bridge one time. My wife and I went in 2018 to see Tottenham win at Stamford Bridge for the first time in like 20 years. That's really, really sucked. But I had the best time afterwards. Went to a local pub there called the Atlas. Hung out with a bunch of great Chelsea supporters. Did not buy a single drink the entire night because they were just amazing. Welcomed me and my wife like we lived in the area, like they had known us for years. And so I have fond memories, be it a bit hazy, of that night. So I would definitely plan to go back. And to be honest, if they started playing football again in June and said, hey, we'll let you in, I would fly there in a heartbeat. I would risk getting some coronavirus to go see Chelsea play again at the Bridge. So
fair enough, man.
Those are my teams, man. Love them.
I honestly thought Phoenix Rising went without saying, but of course Phoenix Rising is my team. I was thinking English centric when that question was asked. You know what I mean?
Oh, so, yeah, for sure. Yeah, there's not another team in England I really support. I like watching, I'll watch a Premier League game if Chelsea's not playing. I like watching a lot of the derby games. I like a lot watching the Championship, EFL League One games, just because of the scrappiness and the heart. But man, my heart is in London at SW6 Stamford Bridge. So that's it, man.
You know what? You know what's amazing about that story? If it had been the 2002 World Cup, you might well have been a West Ham fan.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things. And again, like for those of you that live in England, in 2006, the MLS was 10 years old, 11 years old. They had just, I think around that time, lost, 2 teams. So they were a contracting league, and where I was living at here in Arizona, the closest teams were LA or Texas. And so, while I'd watch, some MLS games, it didn't really sit with me. It wasn't until, 2006 after that World Cup that, it's just something about Chelsea, man, something about Frank Lampard, and just going on from there. It's just been a good ride ever since, ups and downs, but that comes with every team we support, right? No matter, no matter what they're doing in the league, no matter how well they're playing, you wake up on Saturday, you wake up on Sunday, you take a long lunch on Mondays to watch your team play.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is I think a lot of Americans have a similar timeline because, like I mentioned a minute ago, my timeline really started with that 2006 World Cup. So for my favorite player was Thierry Henry, not Lampard, and that's why I ended up going with Arsenal. And then, same thing. The thing that people don't know about Phoenix probably is that we actually hate Los Angeles, and we will not root for any team from Los Angeles. Like, even if we don't have our own sports team and Los Angeles is the next closest team, we will just not watch that sport. So that was kind of how the MLS was. And then to the point that we were finally like, you know what? And shout out to Edward. If there's a team 5,099 miles away, we would rather root for that team than a team from Los Angeles.